Hey, welcome to our Explainer. Today, we are getting into a huge question. A really fundamental one. Where does our sense of morality even come from? We're going to dig into a text that gives a pretty surprising answer, one that might just challenge some of the things you've always believed. So, let's get right into it.
So, where does it come from? Is our sense of right and wrong a gift from some higher power, or is it something else? Something maybe a little closer to home? The source material we're looking at today has a powerful answer, and it starts in a place you might not expect, not with us, but with the animal kingdom.
Okay, so the first big idea we need to wrap our heads around is this. Morality isn't some special thing that only humans have. The argument is that it's actually built on a foundation that's been around for a very, very long time, way before we showed up.
What's so fascinating here is the idea that our moral codes are really just more complex, more sophisticated versions of behaviors you can see all over nature. Our ethics didn't just pop into existence out of nowhere. No, they evolved from something much, much older.
And we're talking about concrete examples here. Things like altruism, selfless acts, compassion, and especially that fierce instinct to protect your young. The source says these aren't just random feel-good behaviors. They are deeply ingrained patterns that help a species survive.
And this is just a brilliant example of the engine behind all of this: natural selection. Think about it. This isn't a crocodile making a conscious, human-like moral choice. It's an instinct that's literally baked into its DNA. Why? Well, because any crocodiles that did eat their own eggs, they didn't pass on their genes, right? The ones that protected them did. So what we might call a moral behavior is really just a survival strategy, sharpened over millions of years.
So how do we get from a crocodile's instinct to complex human morality? Well, the idea is that early humans built on top of those instincts. We started forming conscious agreements with each other. It boils down to a super practical, simple pact. Look, I won't hurt you if you agree not to hurt me. This wasn't some lofty philosophical idea. It was a social contract that came straight out of the need to survive. And it worked. It's what allowed our species to grow and thrive.
Okay, so if morality really does have these natural evolutionary roots, where does that leave the more traditional explanation? The idea that a divine creator gave us our moral code. Well, the source confronts this idea head-on, and its argument is, let's just say, pretty unflinching.
So first, the text brings up that very common argument from beauty. And you know the feeling, right? You see something absolutely magnificent in nature, a hummingbird, a sunset, and it just feels designed. It feels like proof of some benevolent artistic creator. But the source immediately pivots to a really powerful counterpoint.
And there it is. This is the heart of the challenge. If you're going to give a creator credit for the beautiful butterfly, the source says you have to give that same creator credit for the horrifying parasite that blinds a child. You can't just pick and choose. To praise one and ignore the other is to look at only half the picture of what nature really is.
Now, to get this argument, we have to understand a really important distinction the source makes between two different concepts of God. On one hand, you have deism. This is the idea of a distant, clockmaker God, a force that maybe set the universe in motion, but then stepped back. On the other hand, you have theism, the belief in a personal, intervening God, one who cares about our daily lives, our choices, our prayers, and these, the source argues, are two very, very different ideas.
And this is really the bottom line. You might be able to philosophize about some distant ordering force, but to claim you know the specific will of a personal, intervening God, what that God wants you to wear or who to vote for, that, the source says, is an incredible act of hubris. It's asserting a level of knowledge that is simply not possible for any human being. And following that same line of thinking, the text then zooms in on another key pillar of many faiths, the idea of miracles. And it doesn't just dismiss them, it actually proposes a kind of philosophical stress test for any claim of a miracle.
Okay, stick with me here because this is a really fascinating piece of logic. The source says, think about it like this. Why do we trust what people tell us? Well, because our experience shows us that people are usually telling the truth. But that exact same life experience also confirms the laws of nature. Gravity works, water freezes, and so on, constantly, every single day, without fail. So what happens when someone's testimony describes a miracle that breaks a law of nature? You have two pieces of evidence that are in direct conflict. The argument is that you have to weigh them against each other. And the constant, overwhelming proof we have for the laws of nature will always, always outweigh a single person's testimony against it. In fact, it causes an entire annihilation of that testimony.
So, after taking apart those other arguments, the text brings us full circle, right back to its main point. Morality is a human invention. It's something we made for us. You know, our moral struggles, our ideas about justice, fairness, and compassion, they feel so incredibly important to us, right? They feel like the most important things in the world. And because they feel so important, we just assume they must be important to the entire cosmos. The source basically calls this a kind of human vanity. It's like thinking the stars must revolve around us just because we live here, or projecting our human concerns onto the vastness of the universe. So, instead of a grand divine plan, the source leaves us with this really profound thought. Think about the eternity of time that passed before you were born. Were you scared? Were you worried? Of course not. You didn't exist. The text asks us to see the eternity that will come after we die in the exact same way. It's a mirror. It's a state of non-being that isn't something to be afraid of. It's a naturalistic view that, strangely enough, can be deeply calming.
And that brings us to the final, challenging question posed by the source. It suggests a simple test for any belief system we hold. Does it make us better people? Does it make us, as it says, larger, freer, and more loving? And if the answer is no, then you have to ask, what good is it? What's its purpose? That is a really powerful thought to end on. Thanks for digging into this with me today.